If you're looking to buy an interchangeable lens mirrorless camera in 2024 for your travel vlogs or run-and-gun filming, and if you're probably looking into buying a Panasonic G9ii, Panasonic GH7, Fuji cameras or Sony cameras, then this is the video for you where I compare these cameras in terms of convenience and usability in filming, photographing, editing, build quality, and most importantly, the budget. But by the end of the day, the choice is yours, and I hope after watching this video, you make an informed decision in choosing the camera or the camera system that's right for you. I made this video in a story format about my decision-making process based on my experiences, and I believe that by sharing my experience, you can make the right decision based on your experience and needs. This is the longest comparison video I have ever made in this channel, so please brace yourself. If you want to skip to the parts you're interested to know, I have made the chapter markings which you can find in the description below. I purchased the Panasonic G9 Mark II in 2023 as this seems to be the package for travel vloggers and run-and-gun filmmakers, or so I thought. It can shoot 26 megapixel photos and can also shoot and compute high-res in-camera processed photos. It can shoot up to 4K 120 frames per second 10-bit 422 and 5.8K 10-bit 420 internally or something like that. Decent dynamic range and autofocus for photos and videos. Excellent image stabilization and weather sealing, but practically how did it do? With the weight and its usability, is it actually worth the money for this purchase? That is the question I'm trying to answer in this video by comparing the Sony A6700 with G9ii and GH7, which is close to GH6 in body but closer to G9ii in technology, but better. I have completely shifted to using only the Sony A6700 and DJI Pocket 3 for my travel, and I should say that I'm pretty satisfied with this arrangement. To understand my shift in gear and perspective, you need to understand my background. I got into travel and wildlife photography in 2012 and I started making travel videos from 2021 along with my wife Alissa for this channel. I have used several Nikon and Canon cameras since 2012 for photography and I changed to Sony in 2015 starting with the Sony A6000. I have changed my gear several times since then. Sony A6300 in 2017, Nikon D500 and Fujifilm X-T4 in 2018. Then in 2021, I added the Nikon Z6 II to the mix, which completed my travel photos and video arsenal. I took them along with all the accumulator lenses for a 13-day long trip traveling throughout the western stretch of Thailand covering 3,000 kilometers. This brought me to the more important realization. Carry only what's necessary and make what's necessary as light as possible. So I started to focus on what is necessary. More on this criteria later in this video. Here is my experience over the 13-day long trip. Nikon Z6 II is excellent for time-lapse, especially for day-night or night-day transitions. Photo and video autofocus were bearable, good dynamic range for photos, usable in-body image stabilization, excellent weather sealing. The dynamic range for video is bad and it did not have log recording. 4K 60 frames per second was with the APS-C size crop and the lenses were heavy. In Fujifilm X-T4, the videos were sharp and photo quality was excellent depending on the lenses. The Fujifilm X-T4 has F-log recording for very good dynamic range in videos. Fuji colors for videos are creative, good for straight and creative photos, good dynamic range for photos, excellent weather sealing. But the cons are grainy photos in all the settings, not so accurate colors in any settings for photos or videos, not as good for star time-lapsing, inaccurate exposure in auto exposure mode, very poor autofocus, bad in-body image stabilization, and the lenses were still heavy. Nikon D500 being a DSLR camera, it can shoot excellent photos, but it's terrible for video and the lenses were heavy. So that was when I came up with this criteria that would satisfy my needs. I need to have a camera with a crisp 24 plus megapixel resolution sensor for photos, 4K 60 frames per second videos with minimal crop, decent dynamic range in photos and videos, decent image stabilization, good autofocus, good weather sealing, lightweight, and on top of all these, it should be value for money. Although I love the Fuji colors, I struggled really bad with the X-T4's poor autofocus and lackluster in-body image stabilization. So in 2023, I sold all of my Fuji gear and purchased the Sony FX30. On paper, it satisfies my needs, but as I kept using it, I realized I was unable to handle its weight for a prolonged period of time. On top of that, as I shoot both photos and videos, the time it took for the camera to change from the photo to video mode and vice versa was quite long, and at times it was really annoying. Right about that time, Panasonic G9ii was announced and I pre-ordered the Panasonic G9ii after selling my FX30. 4 months into using the G9ii, I sold it off due to the frustration it caused. I carried G9ii for my trip to Zurich, Santos, Klinthollersee, Liechtenstein, France, Kauai and Erawan National Park, and I used it as my primary photos and video camera. Using the G9ii was the only annoying part of all those trips. I am not going to explain in detail the frustrations I faced using the G9ii, as you can find several videos in my channel about how I came to despise the G9 Mark II. Rather, in this video, I want to show you how the Sony A6700 is better in more usable ways than the G9ii. Faster boot up time. G9ii takes ages to turn on to ready to shoot mode, while the Sony A6700 consistently takes just 2 seconds to turn on to ready to shoot mode. I missed several important shoots because of this issue, and this tops my frustration list using the G9ii. It gets worse using the G9ii with the external SSD recording. This usability is the only factor I expect in the GH7 to be better than the G9ii, and all the rest of the things I discuss in this video might be inherited in GH7, and that's something you should look out for before your purchase. Just replace G9ii with GH7 for the below mentioned criteria. Weather sealing compromise. Talking about the external SSD recording, all the maximum resolution options in G9ii at its highest bitrate are available in the external SSD recording mode only, which means you will compromise on the weather sealing by opening up the ports to the SSD that should be mounted on the camera, increasing the weight and decreasing the portability. Sony A6700 on the other hand can record all resolutions at the highest bitrate internally into the camera. This means you do not have to worry about closing the ports when it drizzles, or dangling cables, or even carrying it for a longer period of time. Lighter system. Speaking of the portability, while the telephoto lenses for the Micro Four Thirds system are lighter than the APS-C counterparts, the bright aperture prime and zoom lenses with APS-C cameras as a system are lighter than the Micro Four Thirds counterparts. For reference, the Leica DG Sumilex 9mm f1.7 Micro Four Thirds lens weighing 130 grams with the Lumix G9ii weighing 658 grams weighs 788 grams in total, while the Sony 11mm f1.8 lens weighing 181 grams with the Sony A6700 weighing 493 grams weighs 674 grams in total. This gives you a weight advantage of about 114 grams. While hiking, you will find that every gram counts and that lighter is better. The same goes for the other lenses too. I can always find a lighter and brighter option to pair with the Sony A6700 to bring the overall weight down. On top of this, to get the best resolution and bitrate from the G9ii, you might want to use a cage and a SSD mount, adding to additional weight. If you're wondering why I chose to compare using the Sony 11mm f1.8 lens, you can expect a future video explaining this. In short, the Sony 11mm f1.8 is 16.5mm f2.7 full frame equivalent, while the 9mm f1.7 is 18mm f3.4 full frame equivalent, which means with all the crops from the active image stabilization from either of these cameras, I can still get a good subject separation, brighter aperture, and wider field of view from the 11mm lens. Price. Let's say that you do all these to get the maximum output from G9ii, spending $1,700 for the body, a 2TB SSD for $170, a cage for $50, and a lens for $500 to a total sum of $2,420. Is the image quality any better from the Sony A6700 system, which costs $1,400 for the body, $548 for the lens, to a sum total of $1,948? Let's check it out. Video quality, format and bitrate. I find that the oversampled XAVC SI 4K at 60 frames per second with 600 megabits per second bitrate with 422 10-bit colors from the Sony A6700 is more than sufficient for my video content. This is the maximum video quality offered by the Sony A6700, and I would say it is excellent. Even zoomed in 2 times, the quality is retained. On top of that, I get the added advantage of clear image zoom for prime lenses. G9ii on the other hand offers 5.8K internal video recording option, which I rarely use because it was 420 color depth. When I use the 5.8K mode using the SSD for 422 colors, the camera heats up pretty fast. I stuck with 4K 60 frames per second all intro modes at its highest bitrate for recording my Era 1 waterfall trip. Even though the camera heated up pretty fast, it was bearable. I found no significant advantage in the video quality from the G9 Mark II over the Sony A6700. The Sony A6700 also did not consume more space in my storage and was much lighter to edit on my computer. There are other factors in the video quality that are better in the Sony A6700 than the G9ii. Video quality, dynamic range. I only shot S-Log3 videos in Sony A6700 and Vlog in G9ii for maximum dynamic range. Comparing the video between both of these cameras, there are no apparent quality benefits from the G9ii videos. As a matter of fact, G9ii videos were having more noise in the shadows at its base ISO compared to the A6700, which was pretty much noise-free at its base ISO. Comparing the dynamic range, I find that the Sony A6700's dynamic range is better in highlights and shadow recovery to a usable amount than the G9ii. Video quality, colors. For some reason, I find that the vegetation colors from the Sony A6700 footage are luscious green when compared to the pale green from the G9ii. If I sat down to color correct the footage from the G9ii, it breaks apart pretty fast after some minor tweaks, so you need to be really careful to expose the image correctly during filming with the G9ii, while you have more latitude to correct in post with the footage from the A6700. I notice more often that there is a green color cast over the footage from the G9ii when there is just vegetation and sky, so I had to adjust the tint more often with the G9ii than the Sony A6700. Auto white balance in G9ii is also pretty bad compared to all the cameras I have used in the past. Image stabilization. G9ii is undoubtedly the crown winner when it comes to image stabilization. It is smooth and fantastic. With that said, I still have to use some stabilization in post. Sony A6700 is not that far away. The active stabilization mode was more than sufficient for handheld and panning situations. I of course cannot walk on film at the same time, and I will have to use image stabilization in post, but I'm comfortable with that as this might be the only compromise for me. Photo quality, image noise. I find the photo quality of A6700 miles better than the G9ii. You may disagree with me, but after shooting all the modes in the G9ii during my Switzerland trip, I found that I had to use a ton of noise reduction even when the image was shot at lower ISOs like ISO 200 or 300. Also, the G9ii gives you a very little margin to make mistakes, and more often the photos do look digital even with the optimal sharpness settings. Photo quality, dynamic range. Using A6700 was a bliss. It gives me more bandwidth to edit in post with lesser noise and more dynamic range. Using the Sony A6700, I did not have to worry about the green cast on the images or blurred images. Sometimes when I don't turn off the image stabilization in the G9ii, the images will be ruined due to the sensor shake. I had to be extremely vigilant about this. But the A6700 was more forgiving. Other photo features. I shot a lot of pre-shutter shots, high-resolution shots using the G9ii, and I felt like they were more of a gimmick than usable feature in G9ii. I actually do not miss these features in the A6700. I am more than content with the 10 or 11 frames per second burst photo capability in the Sony A6700. The biggest problem with the G9ii using the pre-shutter mode was the buffer will be filled pretty fast and it will take some time to clear and end up in missing the moment. The same goes for the high-res shots, but the opposite. The camera will take a certain amount of time to process the high-res images, and during which you will be sitting ducks. Autofocus. Yes, the autofocus performance in the A6700 performs much better and accurate in photos and videos, but I was not too frustrated with the G9ii. It was performing well for what it was, but for extreme fast actions, I would still prefer the Sony A6700 over the G9ii. Conclusion. After switching to the Sony A6700, I realized a few things. The Sony A6700 system is cheaper than the Micro Four Thirds system. Photos and videos are better quality in most cases, and most of all, fewer annoyances with no deal breakers. Spec sheet is not the end of the story. I fell into the trap earlier, and now I'm warning everyone to test the camera thoroughly before buying it to see if it suits your use case. Do not make the mistake I made. I really favored the Sony A6700, but G9ii or GH7 or even the other cameras in the market are not that bad. It is just not that necessary. Some are just overpriced and overrated. I hope you all can relate this video to your experience. I highly recommend you to make the criteria checklist, test out the cameras thoroughly, and then make your next purchase. Thank you for watching this video. Hope you like it. Peace. Let me take a moment to tell you, Alissa and I, we love to travel, and we bring the beauty around the world to you in the form of travel vlogs. If you're interested in traveling and would like to know more about travel gears and itineraries, you should check out our playlist of countries and reviews. It will help you to understand your destination and what to carry during those trips. This is all free, and you can show us your support by watching those videos.
If you enjoy our content, whether it's travel vlogs or gear reviews, and would like to have access to our exclusive content, please support us on Patreon using the link in the description below.